Mountains are places of mystery and surprise. On their icy slopes, rare plants and animals cling to life. Their sheer walls pose a challenge to the brave. Mountains are the bridge between heaven and earth, the home of spirits and gods. In ancient Greece, Zeus, supreme ruler of the skies, was enthroned on Mount Olympus. Venerated from afar, mountains were forbidding places most of us could only marvel at from a distance. But in South America, the ancient kingdom of the Incas was different. The Incas lived high among the mountains, conducting rituals on their peaks. To appease the mountain gods, they made human sacrifices. For those bold enough to climb a mountain's treacherous slopes, enlightenment is the prize. The journey to the top of the world is a journey of discovery. One mystery has puzzled us through history: how mountains came to exist at all. According to Navajo myth, mountains rose up from a flat, featureless world at the beginning of time. The gods raised sacred mountains, with 3 at the center of the world. In 17th century Europe, the theologian Thomas Burnet pondered on the creation of mountains. From a close study of the Bible, he deduced that the world was first as smooth and featureless as an egg. The earth's crust was formed over water like the eggshell, and on this shell stood the Garden of Eden. The Bible relates how God sent a great storm which flooded the earth. Burnet supposed that the flood was caused by the hard shell of the earth's crust breaking open and releasing the waters below. It was jagged pieces of crust protruding from the water that formed the mountains of the world. But if mountains were formed by a single event at the beginning of time, a puzzle remains. High up in mountain rock can be found fossils of sea creatures. When they died, their bodies would have fallen to the sea floor and been slowly buried by sediment. Somehow, the ocean floor rose up to become a mountain, and we now know how. The surface of the earth is a crust of solid rock that lies on the hot, semi-molten mantle. The crust is divided into plates that move. When 2 plates collide, one rides over the other and buckles and folds. And this is how most mountains are formed. The process is slow, but it's been going on for millions of years and continues today. Mountains like the Himalayas in Asia are still rising by 5 millimeters every year. Only occasionally do mountains grow more quickly through volcanic action. When plates collide, molten rock can force its way up through cracks in the crust to produce cone-shaped volcanoes. Over hundreds of millions of years, successive peaks have risen into the sky and crumbled back to level ground. The greatest mountain shapers of all are rivers of ice. Glaciers move slowly downwards all the time, grinding the rock away. The power of moving ice is immense, chiseling deep valleys into the mountainsides. Erosion by ice, wind and rain works on a massive scale, hard to comprehend. In the last century, geologists tried to estimate the erosion rate of the Himalayas by measuring the sediment that the river Ganges carries down to the Bay of Bengal. They calculated that in just 2 days, the volume of sand and mud washed down would, if piled up, be the same size as the Great Pyramid of Egypt. The massive forces of uplift and erosion have produced a variety of mountain shapes and forms. Jagged peaks, now folded and twisted, were once flat layers on the seabed. A towering dome of granite was once a pool of molten rock buried deep underground. Fantastic shapes of sandstone have been whittled away by the phantom carving of wind and rain. Quirks of nature play on human imagination. As a volcanic core of lava cooled, it produced strangely shaped columns. To the Kiowa tribe of Native Americans, they were the claw marks of a ferocious bear. Around the world, stories tell of vicious monsters that prey on unwary travelers in high places. But the real danger posed by mountains is nothing supernatural. It's the treacherous nature of the weather. The higher you go up a mountain, the colder and windier it becomes. Trees give way to scrub and grass, then bare rock. Above this comes snow and ice. Even mountains at the equator have an ice cap if they're high enough. Mountain animals must adapt to the climate as well as the physical challenge of sheer slopes. Many species of goat and sheep are superbly adapted to mountain life. In the European Alps, the chamois is in its element on near vertical walls of slippery rock. In North America, the mountain goat can nimbly climb up precipice and narrow crag from the earliest age. Equally unfazed are the ibex of Europe and Asia. One of the rarest mountain residents is the magnificent screw-horn goat of Central Asia. Blending with the hillside, many mountain animals are hard to spot. This slope looks empty, but keep looking. It's full of blue sheep. Blue sheep and tahr survive on the meager vegetation high in the Himalayas. While most animals keep below the snow line as it descends with winter, the Marco Polo sheep stay high up through the fiercest blizzards. Only animals adapted to the mountain environment can survive in these extreme conditions. Until recently, it was thought that early humans didn't venture into the mountains. But we were wrong. A remarkable discovery high in the European Alps has shed new light on our prehistoric ancestors. Preserved in the ice was found the frozen body of a late Stone Age man. Around him were articles of clothing skillfully made of woven grass and leather to protect him from the cold of the high pass. Much later travelers found the journey no less perilous. The Carthaginian general Hannibal is famous for the war elephants he brought through the Alps to outflank his Roman enemy. Mountain ranges make boundaries and barriers all over the world. Early American settlers were stopped in their tracks by the Rocky Mountains. Enterprising pioneers finally bumped and rattled their way through in covered wagons, carrying everything they would need for a new life beyond the hills. They were guided by maps charted by early explorers. Men like Lewis and Clark who'd been looking for a trade route through to the Pacific Ocean and the treasures of Asia beyond. Approaching Asia from the other direction was the British Army. They used surveying equipment of unparalleled precision to map the whole of India. They made thousands of measurements with theodolites to work out the height of mountains above sea level. As they reached the Himalayas, the surveyors realized that among them might be the highest peak on Earth. Finding that peak required complex calculations. First, they had to make allowances for the curvature of the Earth. Distant mountains are actually taller than they seem. Then there's a second correction to be made for refraction of light. Just as a pencil half in water appears to be bent, the different densities of air at higher altitudes makes the distant peak look taller. Once that allowance was made, they could confirm that this was the highest mountain above sea level in the world. They named it Mount Everest, after the Surveyor General of the time. Ironically, the peak of Mount Everest is not the furthest point from the center of the Earth. That's Mount Chimborazo, closer to the equator in South America. The explanation? As the Earth spins, it bulges outwards, increasing its radius at the equator. Compared with the vast diameter of the Earth, mountains are just small irregularities. On a globe the same size as a man, the tallest mountain would show up as no bigger than a large grain of sand. Which perhaps makes it surprising how much effect a change in altitude can have. In the 1530s, the Spanish conquistadors had trouble on the Andean mountains of South America. As they climbed higher, they felt strangely breathless and suffered terrible headaches. Some felt seasick, even though they were on solid ground. The answer was found a century later on another mountain in France, the Puy de Dôme. The mathematician Blaise Pascal had a simple mercury barometer taken to the top to show that atmospheric pressure drops with altitude. The higher you climb, the less air there is to breathe. Lungs and heart have to work harder and compensate for the lack of oxygen by raising the blood pressure to the brain, and this causes the symptoms of altitude sickness. But many people spend all their lives in the high mountains of the world without problem. Over time, the human body adapts with larger lung capacity and more red cells in the blood to use the limited oxygen supply more efficiently. And local people make use of animals that have adapted to high altitude, like the guanaco. The guanaco and the vicuña are species of camel living high in the Andes. Their coat is so thick and fine that very little of their body heat escapes into the cold wind. The fleece of the vicuña makes the finest wool in the world. The cloth is so soft, they say it's like wearing a film of liquid. In the Himalayas, there's a creature that lives even higher, the yak. Local people use it as a source of milk, as well as a beast of burden. These animals are so adapted to the thin air of this altitude that they don't thrive well at sea level. Plants, too, have ways of adapting to mountain life. Trees that would normally grow to massive heights at lower altitude are smaller on mountain slopes. Some trees just hug the ground like a bush. Many alpine plants grow in tight mats or cushions. Inside these densely packed leaves, they've made a microclimate of their own with temperatures several degrees higher than outside. Their growth is often slow, like the South American Loretta. But slow growth means long life. Some plants may be 1,000 years old. In high valleys sheltered from winds, there are strange, even unique plants. The giant puya of the Andes is the world's largest herb and can live for 150 years. At the end of its life, it sprouts a giant stalk covered with blossom. When this withers, it dies. In Hawaii, there's another rare mountain plant, the silver sword. Its leaves are silver to reflect the intense radiation of the sun, and fleshy to retain moisture. It grows on the barren upper slopes around the crater of a high volcano. Like the puya, it flowers only once and then dies. Mountain survival is a skill that plants and animals have developed over millions of years. Only in the last 200 have humans mastered the art of climbing the highest peaks. Summits have become challenges to overcome. We pit our wits against the vagaries of nature. The fashion for mountaineering as exploration and sport dates back to the 19th century. Intrepid Victorians would return from the alpine peaks of Europe and give illustrated lectures. They told of monstrous rivers of ice and treacherous crevasses, of jagged summits that resisted all attempts at ascent. Audiences were held spellbound by tales of heroism and adventure, of survival against the odds. The 1850s were the golden age of mountaineering, and scores of climbers conquered peak after peak. By modern standards, climbing equipment was primitive. Stout hobnailed boots gave grip on rock. The main aid to climbing was the alpenstock, a long staff pointed at one end and with an axe head on the other. One particularly elusive peak was the Matterhorn. A party led by the artist Edward Whymper finally made the summit in 1865. But their triumph was short-lived. On their descent, one man slipped. They were roped together, but the rope wasn't strong enough. 4 men plunged to their doom, a tragedy that weighed heavily on the sport for years to come. In the past 100 years, climbing aids have become increasingly sophisticated. Ropes are much stronger, and climbers use metal wedges jammed into the rock face to check their fall if they should slip. With the right equipment, the sheerest of slopes can now be climbed with a calculated level of risk. The Yosemite National Park has one of the tallest walls of rock in the world. One ascent took 26 days. Each night the climbers would bivouac, suspended by ropes above a sheer drop into oblivion. Danger is part of the sport, but some take it to extremes. This must be the ultimate challenge. Free climbing, with no protection, pitting your wits and athleticism against nature and gravity. The French climber Catherine d'Estival has become a legend for her skillful daredevil ascents. All she carries is a bag of chalk to absorb sweat on her fingertips. However well you know your own capabilities, mountains can still trap you. Conditions at high altitude can change suddenly and dramatically. One of the biggest dangers is an avalanche. Unstable layers of snow and ice can turn into a deadly cascade that sweeps away everything in its path. avalanches can strike without warning, and every year exact a heavy toll. But their threat doesn't deter those who look to mountains for their thrills. Skiers and climbers may think they have these snowy slopes to themselves, but they often have company. The tiny piker spends its winter in a burrow where it raises its young, feeding on dried grass. Another way to survive the cold of high-altitude winter is to sleep through it. In mountains all over the world, there are species of marmot that hibernate for as much as 8 months of the year. Every spring, high mountain slopes echo to their shrill call as marmots emerge from their burrows to feed on the new vegetation. In ancient times, a legend spread along the trade routes of Asia of mysterious creatures which dug gold out of the mountainside. They were probably marmots living in a gold-bearing layer of mountain rock in what is now Pakistan. The marmots, of course, had no idea of the value of this strange yellow rock, but others did. Some of the most unlikely characters have fallen for the lure of gold in them thar hills. In the 1890s, a find was reported in the frozen north across the Canadian border. A story spread of tons of gold just waiting to be dug from the ground, and the great Klondike gold rush was on. Foolhardy prospectors attempted to climb the infamous Chilkoot Pass. They called it the Golden Stairs, though few of them struck it rich. Ironically, it's another golden metal that now provides more income than all the gold strikes of the past: copper. Much of it comes from this mountaintop in Utah. The folding and faulting process has exposed a rock containing copper ore, but its extraction is only viable on a massive scale. These machines can do in 1 year what it takes the natural forces of erosion 1 million years to achieve. They've literally taken the top off the mountain. We've applied our engineering muscle to travel up mountains. This railway in Switzerland uses cogs instead of normal wheels to crank its way uphill. The highest railway in the world is in South America. It climbs to such an altitude that the passengers are brought a supply of oxygen to help them breathe. It was the lack of oxygen that prevented early climbers from reaching their greatest goal, the conquest of Mount Everest. In 1924, a British attempt led by George Mallory used the first portable oxygen equipment. It was heavy and often broke down, and some purists derided these artificial aids as unsporting. Whether Mallory and his companion Irving actually made it to the top will never be known. They set off for the summit but never returned. We still didn't know how the world looked from its highest peak. We found out a few years later. 2 biplanes took off from India on an historic flight that took them right over Everest. The pilots filmed what they saw, a first record of a breathtaking view. For some time it was thought that humans alone had reached this height, but an astronomer looking at the moon in northern India noticed a flight of geese high in the air. He measured the size of the geese compared to the size of the moon and calculated that they too were flying as high as the peak of Everest, in the thinnest, coldest of atmospheres. The Asian bar-headed goose climbs in one day from sea level to this colossal height on its annual migration. As we explore the world's mountains, we learn more of the creatures that inhabit them. But many mysteries remain. Among them, reports of strange creatures that leave massive footprints in the snow. High in the Himalayas, local people tell of a creature called the Yeti, part human, part bear or ape. Some say it's the missing link in human evolution. If as yet unknown creatures are to be found on Earth, the cloak of the mountains gives them a place to hide. In an isolated wilderness, we may sometimes glimpse the last survivors of a rare species, like the mountain lion. And above the snow line in the mountains of southern Asia lives a rare treasure, the snow leopard. This beautiful creature is the largest predator at this altitude, the highest cat in the world. Except maybe for one. Many years ago, a team of climbers on the Matterhorn noticed that they were being followed. A 4-month-old kitten called Mitzi climbed with them all the way to the summit and into the record books. In the last 50 years, the highest peaks of the world have been climbed, a testament to increased athleticism and stamina in this most dangerous of sports. This is truly the hard way to the top, but a summit gained in this manner is a route to personal fulfillment. To many, mountains are holy places, a bridge to the heavens. The Himalayas are personified by the Hindu goddess Parvati. Her other name is the Mountaineer. Our reverence for mountains can take many forms. They are magnificent monuments to our geological heritage and a treasure store of unique forms of life. Mountains always have and always will dominate our world.